All right, so you're new to Warhammer 40,000, whether that's one game or a couple of games in, and in this podcast, I want to look at some of the fundamental tactics. We're stepping beyond this idea of army, codex, faction. We're looking at kind of the flow, the mechanics of the game, and some things to keep in mind. Questions that I like to ask as we progress through the game that are going to guide me with tactical options. And then based on those tactical options, I'm going to take my army-wide tactics, whether I'm playing my Samhan Warhost or my Grey Knights or my Berserkers of Scalathrax, Coronate Army, and look for those opportunities for win on the table. Now, up on my channel here and on my blog, underneath this video is a link to my blog. We're going to go into this subject matter, these tactics, a lot more specifically. We're going to really kind of get down and break down the checkpoints within each step, but it's good to have an overview. My goal, and it's not ambitious, my goal is to help you win your next game. Whether that's tomorrow, whether that's in a few days, let's get the tools, let's get the tech, let's get the technology, let's make it happen. So visualize this. You and I are playing 40K, and right now I'm working on Tyranids. I'm playing Tyranids, so I would bring my Tyranids to play. I don't know what army you're playing. Hopefully it's not Dark Eldar. In all of the years I've been playing 40K, I've never been able to beat Dark Eldar. They just zip around in all their transports. I'm getting venom spammed to death. Everything's poisoned. Everything has a higher initiative than my assault bugs. My high toughness on my big bugs is meaningless. Dark Eldar are just, well, they're an amazing army. I hope you're not playing Dark Eldar. So you're pulling out your army, I'm pulling out my army. We're getting set up, right? This idea of a club or a shop, we got a table, we agreed on a mission, and we're pulling out our armies. The first thing that I'm looking to do is, I'm going to share with you from my point of view. I'm looking at your army, I'm looking at what you're pulling out, and I'm looking for the underlying tactics behind it. I'm looking with this idea of, well, what units are you playing and what's the goal? You know, do you have a Tau or Imperial Guard gun line? Okay, you're going to sit in the back and roll lots of dice and shoot me. How am I going to beat that? How am I going to close that? Do you have stuff that can really deep strike in and kind of appear from alternate entry points? Do you have a Death Star? What are you looking to do? And I'm trying to identify the pillars or the pivot points of your army. So if a wide segment of your army relies on psyker support and using your psykers to kind of boost things, then target priority number one with extreme hatred is to take out those psykers. So I'm looking to identify how your army works and what do I need to eliminate as soon as possible in the early turns of the game. So now we're setting up, we're deploying. I don't want to make the mistake of thinking the game starts on turn one. The game starts before that. I mean, already I'm asking these questions. What are you intending to do with your army? How do you intend to play it? The idea is when you start a game, whatever point level or power level we're playing at, we're both at our strongest at the start of the game. And then every turn, so turn one, player two, turn two, player one, player two, turn three, player one, player two. Every turn, we are both getting weaker and weaker. My army's taking losses, I'm making mistakes, you're taking losses, you're making mistakes, and as our army gets smaller and smaller and smaller, the volume of dice, and keep that in mind, volume of dice is really important, the volume of dice gets smaller, what we can do on the table tactically gets smaller. So before the game starts, turn one, I want to leverage, I want to be in maximum position to really push. Imagine a race. You and I can start at the start line, but if I could do something where legally I'm allowed to start 5 or 10 feet past the start line, I have a massive advantage as soon as the race begins. That's what we want to do with 40K. So deployment is key. Imagine the gaming table. There's my deployment. We're going to break it up into three parts, three bands across the table from left to right or right to left. My deployment zone, the band down near physically where I'm deploying my models and I'm standing, your deployment zone, your stuff, and then the midfield, that mid band. I need to get to the midfield as soon as possible. I need to take my army and put it in the midfield as soon as possible because this is going to create the biggest threat bubble. Now, up in the archives of my channel here and on my blog, you can go search. Threat bubble is huge. We're going to get into that. That is some huge 40K tech, but I want to frame it in case you're new to 40K. Take a tactical squad of Marines. Put them down on the table. Take your tape or your measuring stick and measure out how far they can move in one turn and how far all their weapons can shoot. Draw that 360 degrees around the model and around the unit. Any other opposing enemy models that move into that radius are under threat of the threat bubble. If I can get to the center of the table, I can maximize all my dice. All my bolters will be in range. Every weapon will be in range. I can maximize the greatest volume of dice against you. So turn one, I want to get out there. Turn one, I want to have some units that appear, wind up, drop in, deep strike, boost, move fast, send some bikes, send some jet bikes. Something that goes into your deployment zone that locks you down and keeps you busy in your deployment zone so you cannot make it to the midfield. If I can get turn one midfield through deployment, that's huge. Second, and this is a little bit challenging because not only do I not know what army you play right now, as long as it's not Dark Eldar, I don't know the game table we're playing on. So every single gaming table, whatever it's going to be, is going to have key action points, key pieces of terrain that are going to give your army an advantage. And it could be I get cover saves that I really need. It could be line of sight blocking terrain. If there's a big piece of line of sight blocking terrain, say like a little bit of a mountain hill, and I can get my bugs behind there so you can't shoot and then I can run around, that's big. If I have a heavy weapons team or a specialist team and I can, my Chaos Space Marine army, some Havocs or something like that, if I can get them in a higher elevation and now have line of sight to multiple areas, I want to identify those key terrain pieces and occupy them. Deployment. How can I deploy my models at the beginning of the game, my units at the beginning of the game that will allow me to occupy those? So we haven't even started 40K yet. We haven't even started the battle. And already I'm stacking the deck. A lot of us, what we look for is this big, decisive moment where we win the game. And that does happen from time to time. It's exciting. But more so, 40K is about the little wins, the little things that happen turn by turn by turn, the little advantages. And these advantages allow you to recover or continue momentum to do well when the dice turn against you. Now, I don't want to blame the dice, but it does happen. Let's talk about understanding the dice. This is called building dice pools. And this is another really, really important. I mean, we're going to get into dice pools. That's up there on the blog. But with that, it's important to at least begin to understand these things. So I have a group of Space Marines. Based on their weapons, I take the dice out before I shoot. And just as a visual, let's say I'm going to put them, okay, bolter, combi, plasma, gun, and heavy bolter on there, right? So I put the dice out. That's my starting dice pool. I pick those dice up. I roll them. I need 3s to hit, right? Roll them out on the table. I take off my misses. Now the dice that I started with, the pool is smaller. Now I have to wound you. Let's say I need 4s. I roll those. My 1s, 2s, and 3s, I take those off. Now I'm left with, I went from shooting to wounding. Now that dice pool is even less. All right, so now we take modifiers. We figure out what saves you get. You make those saves. You do it with your dice, but essentially it's the same dice. And now the dice that you don't save, that pool is even smaller. Those are kills on the model. Now, there's another step because you might have something to prolong that cycle. Multiple wounds, feel no pain, ways to avoid taking a wound, things like that. But essentially the dice get smaller and smaller and smaller each turn in order for me to deal out removal of enemy models or removal of your models, or on the opposite side, removal of my models. So I want to get the maximum amount of dice every single turn that I can. I want to overlap units. I want to shoot your 1 unit. I want to shoot your tactical Marines with 2, 3, or 4 units of my Chaos Space Marines, and I'm going to drop the Helldrake on you, right? I want to build these overwhelming volume pools of dice into there. Now, every game turn that goes on, if we look at our entire army, I don't know if you'd have enough dice. I have enough dice in my Coronate army because I roll a lot of dice. But this is really interesting. lay out your army physically on the table. I find sometimes tactically it helps to do this because the visual helps reinforce the strategy. If you lay out the army that you play on the table and you put the dice next to each unit for the weapon that it can shoot, so here's a bolter, here's a plasma gun, here's a plasma pistol, whatever, you could see all the dice. That's it. For the entire game, at the start of the game, that is your dice. Now every turn they're going to get less and less and less and less. This is why controlling the dice is key. So you're taking losses. Let's go back to our Space Marine tactical squad, because I guarantee you, you probably play Space Marines. You've definitely faced Space Marines, and even if you're a diehard Xenos player, at some point, it's in Games Workshop's DNA. They know it. They've done the study. At some point, you will be playing Space Marines. I like to use Space Marines as my kind of tactical discussion because everyone is familiar with them. If you take a tactical Marine squad, put it out on the table, and put the dice next to it, that's the maximum number of dice that it can generate. As you take losses, and it depends on the weapon profile and how many units are in the squad. Obviously, like a big group of Necron warriors is going to be different, but at some point, you're going to lose enough units, enough models in that unit. So you're going to have, like, for attack squad, it's about 3 or 4 Space Marines. 5, if you get lucky. 3 or 4 Space Marines. Now, look at the dice that you have. Remember, you have to hit, then you have to wound, then you have to armor save. You're not going to be able to generate enough dice to reliably, based on the swinginess of the dice in a D6 system, to reliably be able to remove enemy models. So to continue fighting with that unit would make no sense. It is better to now pull that unit back, start backpedaling, because remember, you're in the midfield. That's the other thing with the midfield. Castling up is a deployment. Castle up is where I take my army, I put it in the left or right side corner of the table because it limits the avenue that you can approach. I maximize my shooty fire lanes. You come to me. The challenge with that, and it works. I mean, my Grey Knights, one of the deployment models that they use is castling, and it is powerful. But the danger to castling, if you can counter it, is if you're on top of me and I'm taking losses, I have nowhere to go. I have nowhere to go. If you are in the midfield, you have somewhere to radiate out from. You have somewhere to go. So if that group of Marines takes losses, you're in the midfield, pull them back to your deployment zone. Just get them out of rapid fire range. Get them out. Because now what you can do is, so let's say I have 4 attack squads, 2 take some damage, I can pull back with 2, I can put them close together, and now in theory, operate them as one, right? The little group can shoot into one unit and the other group can shoot into the same unit. So it allows you to reform units, but more importantly, it allows you to save them, because now as we move into the end game, at the end of 40K, it's pretty grim, right? We've both taken a tremendous amount of losses. We're down to a few models each. It's coming down to the final victory here, the final turns. Those little squads that you saved, now the volume of dice is enough that they can do some damage, because I'm not shooting at a unit of 10 models. I'm shooting into a unit like my own of 2 or 3 models. So if I have 3 or 4 little groups of models that I saved, units that I saved, I kind of mob them up, mob rule, and in the end game I use them. It is very, very potent. Just a few ideas. That's just like the surface of 40K core strategy that we're looking at, and we're going to get into, and we're going to cover. My goal is to make you a better player. My goal is to share with you my gaming experiences, because it benefits the community. The more awesome you get at 40K, the more awesome that hunger for glory, that hobby radiates, and we're going to get new players into this hobby. Plus, you can have a good time. It's a great hobby. It's a great game. So for your next game, I want to give you that win.